They say when you love what you do, it doesn't feel like work. For a long time, that was true for me. My name is Nova, and for 5 years, I poured everything I had into a fast-growing tech startup in Seattle. I was one of the first 10 employees back when we were working out of a co-working space with bad coffee and broken air conditioning. I helped shape the brand, built our marketing strategy from scratch, and stayed up countless nights working on investor decks, product launches, and customer retention plans. I wasn't just part of the company, I was part of its soul. And I believed we were building something real, something good. Our CEO, Ethan, was charismatic, charming, and always smiling just a second too long. He had the kind of energy that filled a room and sucked the air right out of it. But back then, I thought he was just intense. Visionary, even. He could talk his way into any funding round, and I admired that. Until I started noticing the cracks. It began small. Promises made in all-hands meetings that quietly disappeared a few weeks later. Equity that was being finalized. Bonuses that were still under review. Team members who brought up concerns suddenly moving on to other opportunities. And then there was Chloe. Chloe joined as a brand consultant, but somehow ended up sitting in on leadership meetings within 2 months. She had no background in tech, little understanding of our product, but always had a flattering laugh for Ethan's worst jokes. Everyone saw what was happening, but no one said anything. The unspoken rule was clear: stay in line, keep your job. Still, I held on. I worked harder. I told myself I could push through the politics and get back to the mission. After all, I was good at my job. Damn good. I had data, results, loyalty from my team. But loyalty meant nothing in that place. I started to feel it, slow and creeping, like a fog rolling in. Emails from leadership stopped including me. Decisions were made without my input. My biggest campaign to date, which brought in over $1 million in new revenue, was suddenly being credited to someone else. Chloe. One day, I walked past the glass conference room and saw Ethan presenting my exact pitch deck. My words, my slides, except my name was nowhere on it. I stood there, frozen, heart pounding in my chest. It was like watching someone steal your diary and read it on national television. That was the first time I felt the shift. The sense that no matter how hard I worked, how much I gave, I was disposable. But I wasn't ready to give up. Not yet. Not when I had built so much. Not when I had sacrificed so much. I told myself things would get better, that maybe I was being paranoid, too emotional, too invested. But deep down, something had already broken. A voice inside me whispered, "This place is not what it seems." And it never was. I didn't know it yet, but that whisper would soon become a scream. And the day Ethan called me into his office, everything would change. A week after that moment outside the glass conference room, I got the calendar invite. Creative alignment meeting, leadership only. My name wasn't on the guest list. It was the first time I wasn't invited to a strategic planning session, something I'd built my entire role around. I stared at the email, heart sinking. I wanted to believe it was an oversight, but deep down, I knew better. I tried brushing it off. Maybe it was a new format, maybe they'd loop me in later. But then came the email summary. The subject line read, Q4 Brand Strategy, Presentation by Chloe. Chloe, the same woman who'd only been here 8 months, who once asked me how to open a Google Doc. Apparently, she'd presented my strategy, word for word. My campaign outline, my research, my projected metrics. I scrolled through the slide deck she'd attached. I recognized every chart, every line of copy. Even the title was mine. Human, not just tech. No footnote, no created by Nova. Just Chloe's initials in the footer. My hands shook. I slammed my laptop shut and sat there in silence, trying to breathe. Was this what it felt like? To be erased in real time? I walked straight to Ethan's office. I didn't schedule a meeting. I didn't knock. He looked up, smug as ever. Nova, everything okay? I placed the printed slide deck on his desk. You want to tell me what this is? He glanced at it like it was a menu. Looks like Q4 strategy. Impressive work from Chloe, right? I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was unreal. That's my work, I said, voice tight. You know it. I've been building that campaign for 3 months. Ethan leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. Look, we all collaborate here. Ideas bounce around. No one really owns anything. I stared at him. You know that's not true. He shrugged. Nova, you're brilliant. But sometimes, Brilliance doesn't always translate to alignment. Chloe? She understands how to play ball. She knows how to make leadership comfortable. There it was, the sentence that told me everything. I wasn't being excluded because I was failing. I was being excluded because I was too damn good and too hard to control. I left his office without another word, but inside, something cracked open. For days, I couldn't focus. I replayed every conversation I'd ever had with Chloe, every shared coffee break, every moment I thought we were a team. I taught her everything I knew. I gave her resources. I defended her when other team members said she was underqualified. She wasn't just stealing my work, she'd been using me. That Friday, we had our weekly marketing sync. Chloe presented the campaign as if she'd birthed it herself. She smiled at me once, tight-lipped, nervous, almost apologetic. I didn't smile back. After the meeting, I went back to my desk, opened a blank document, and wrote one sentence at the top. Never let anyone steal your voice again. But Ethan wasn't done. The following Monday, I was pulled into a surprise performance conversation. HR was there, so was Ethan. The air was thick with something unspoken. "We're concerned," Ethan began, "about your recent attitude. Some members of leadership feel you've been resistant to collaboration, you've isolated yourself." My mouth went dry. "Because I spoke up about my work being stolen?" Ethan smiled, slow and measured. "You're emotional, Nova. It's making people uncomfortable." I wanted to scream. Instead, I looked at the HR rep who couldn't meet my eyes. That night, I stayed late at the office, alone. I sat in the dark, watching the lights of downtown Seattle blink through the window. For the first time in 5 years, I wondered if I'd made a mistake building my life here. If everything I'd sacrificed had just been fuel for someone else's fire. But I wasn't done. Not yet. They thought they could bury me in politics and lies, but they didn't know what I was willing to do when pushed to the edge. And Ethan? He was about to find out. The silence was the worst part. Not the meetings I wasn't invited to, not the glances exchanged across the room, not even the fake smiles. It was the silence, the kind that creeps in like smoke, choking you slowly. People who used to laugh with me in the break room now barely said hello. My Slack messages were left on read. Questions I asked in meetings were met with awkward pauses and redirections. It was like I'd already been erased. They just hadn't told me yet. I started documenting everything. Times, dates, emails. I created a folder on a personal drive titled Insurance. At first, I didn't know what I'd do with it, but I knew enough to trust my gut. And my gut was screaming, "You're next." Then came the message. An anonymous email sent to my personal address. The subject line, "You didn't hear this from me." Attached was an internal recording, audio from a conversation between Ethan and Chloe in one of the upstairs conference rooms. I stared at my screen, debating for a full 5 minutes before pressing play. Ethan's voice was unmistakable. Calm, controlled, cruel. "Nova's too much of a liability. She's smart, but she asks too many questions. After the IPO, we cut her loose." Chloe laughed lightly. "Do we have to wait that long? We have to make it look clean. HR's preparing a file. One more attitude issue, and we've got our exit." My body went cold. They weren't just trying to push me out, they were orchestrating my exit, down to the last fake HR document. I sat still for what felt like an hour, listening to the audio over and over again. First in shock, then in rage. Every instinct in me wanted to storm into Ethan's office, play the audio on full blast, and watch the color drain from his smug face. But that would be too easy, and too fast. I needed to think, strategize. I couldn't just be smart, I had to be smarter than both of them combined. But the window was closing faster than I thought. 3 days later, I got called into another check-in meeting. This time, it was with HR Director Michelle, a woman who always wore a forced smile and spoke in therapeutic tones. "We're concerned," she said, like she was reading from a cue card. "You've become disengaged, detached. There are reports that you've been difficult to work with." I looked her straight in the eye. "From who?" She didn't answer. "Chloe?" I asked. "Ethan?" Still nothing. "I want to see the complaints. I have a right to know who's saying what." Michelle shifted in her seat. "These conversations are confidential." "Convenient," I replied. That night, I got home and opened my laptop. I moved the recording to a secure folder, along with screenshots of emails, timestamps, pitch decks, and every single campaign they'd ever tried to erase me from. I renamed the folder, Evidence, the Whole Truth. It wasn't about revenge. Not yet. It was about survival. I kept going to work every day, like nothing had changed, smiling, nodding, pretending to be compliant while I quietly collected every document they didn't know I still had access to. But the truth was, I was running out of time, and they knew it. That Thursday, I was called into Ethan's office again. He didn't look up when I walked in, just gestured to the seat across from him, like a king summoning a subject. "You probably know what this is about," he began, his tone almost gentle. I said nothing. He sighed, like he was the one being burdened. "There's been a lot of discussion, and after careful consideration, we've decided it's best to part ways. Officially, your departure will be framed as a mutual decision to pursue other opportunities. It'll go out in tomorrow's all hands." I blinked. "That's it?" I asked. Ethan smiled. "I think we both know this has been coming for a while." "You're firing me," I said slowly, but calling it mutual. He leaned forward, elbows on the table. "I'm giving you a gift, a clean exit. You should take it." I felt my chest tighten. All the work, the late nights, the campaigns, the loyalty, gone. Just like that. I stood up, eyes burning. "I want the rest of the day to pack my things." Ethan nodded. "Of course, HR will escort you." But I didn't go pack. I walked out of the office, down the hall, past HR, and straight into the women's restroom. I locked the stall, sat down on the closed toilet seat, and shook. Not cried, not screamed, just sat there shaking. This wasn't just a job. This was 5 years of my life, my identity, my pride, my blood, sweat, and sacrifices. And they were erasing it with a single email. I stared at the wall in front of me, breathing in silence. And then it hit me. I had everything. Every file, every lie, every whisper. They thought they'd buried me, but I was sitting on a ticking time bomb, one they never saw coming. And tomorrow? Tomorrow would be the detonation. I walked out of the bathroom with one goal: keep my face calm no matter how loud the war inside me was. Ethan thought he'd won, and maybe for a moment I believed he had too. But as I passed his office and caught his smug silhouette leaning back in his chair, like he'd just cleaned up some messy problem, I felt it. Not rage, not grief, clarity. I had one afternoon left, one afternoon and a folder that could burn everything to the ground. I returned to my desk, ignoring the glances. People had heard whispers. Maybe some even knew, but no one said a word. That's how this place worked. Speak up and you disappear. I opened my laptop, plugged in my personal hard drive, and got to work. I didn't panic. I didn't rush. I simply sorted. I compiled every document I'd collected, emails showing manipulated campaign data, memos Ethan had doctored to mislead investors, pitch decks with signatures that weren't his. I included the full transcript of the recording, along with a secure download link to the original audio file. And then, I wrote the email. Subject line: for those who still care about the truth. No salutation. No goodbye. Just the facts. I was told today that I'm no longer a fit for this company, but before I go, I'd like to leave behind the version of this story that hasn't been edited for PR. Attached are documents, recordings, and internal materials that paint a fuller picture of how decisions are really made here, who gets credit, who gets erased, and how trust has been weaponized. You don't have to believe me. Just read, listen, ask your own questions. Then, decide what kind of leadership you want to follow. I added over 50 recipients, managers, team leads, junior staff, even a few board members whose addresses I had from an old strategy brief. I didn't CC Ethan. He didn't deserve the warning. I hit send, and then I deleted every trace of the email from my sent folder. 5 minutes later, I walked into the all-hands meeting. Ethan was already speaking. As we continue to scale, we're making strategic changes. Some transitions are difficult, but necessary for alignment and growth. I sat near the back, quiet, composed. He glanced in my direction just once, his lips curled into a rehearsed look of pity. Let's take a moment to recognize Nova for her contributions. We wish her all the best in her next chapter. A few people clapped. Most looked confused. And then phones started buzzing. 1, then 2, then 5, then 20. I saw someone open their laptop, eyes widening. A woman 2 rows ahead of me whispered to her colleague, then stood up and walked out. Another followed. Then a third. Ethan paused, mid-sentence. Is everything okay? Silence. Until someone near the front finally said it out loud. Is this real? Ethan blinked. What are you talking about? Someone held up their phone. This email, these files, they're from Nova. He went pale. "Wait, this isn't the place, let's handle this offline," he stammered. But it was too late. I watched as more people stood, some out of principle, some out of fear, some because they'd finally seen behind the curtain. 5 minutes later, the room was nearly empty. Ethan stood frozen on stage, still holding the clicker to his PowerPoint. And I? I walked out last. No words, no drama, just the sound of the truth doing what it always does, catching up. I didn't go home right after the all-hands meeting. I walked 3 blocks down to a small coffee shop where the Wi-Fi was slow and the chairs wobbled, but no one knew my name. I ordered a latte, sat by the window and waited, not for revenge, for gravity, because that's what truth is. Heavy, inevitable. It doesn't explode. It sinks. Quietly, deeply. By the time I opened my inbox, the fallout had already begun. The first email came from a colleague on the sales team. "I always knew something was off. Thank you for saying what no one else could." Then a message from a junior designer. I cried reading that. "You said everything I couldn't." The emails kept coming. One by one, some short, some long, some anonymous. All of them echoing the same thing. We saw it too. We were just afraid. That night, I turned off my phone and slept for 12 hours straight. By morning, the story had taken on a life of its own. Someone had leaked the email to a popular industry blog, Tech Insider Wire. They posted it word for word, including the audio link. Within hours, it had over 70,000 views. People weren't just reading, they were commenting, sharing, tagging former employees. And then, the investors got involved. It started with a LinkedIn post from a partner at one of our seed firms. "Transparency is the foundation of trust. Recent allegations about executive misconduct at company name are deeply troubling. We've launched an internal review." That post had over 3,000 likes within a day. I sat back in my apartment, reading it in silence. I didn't feel victorious. Not yet. I just felt seen. Later that afternoon, I received a message from Mia, one of the company's early engineers who'd left 2 years ago under suspicious circumstances. "Nova, it happened to me too. Ethan rewrote my code documentation and accused me of hiding bugs. I didn't have proof back then, but you do. Let me know how I can help." The cracks weren't just forming. They were spreading. By day 3, employees were walking out. Entire departments requested emergency meetings with HR. The legal team sent a statement to all staff saying they were taking the matter seriously and would cooperate fully with any external investigations. Ethan, however, stayed silent. Until Friday. That morning, I received a call from a number I didn't recognize. I let it go to voicemail, but then it rang again and again. Eventually, I picked up. It was Ethan. His voice, usually slick and confident, was flat, tight, controlled in the way a drowning man tries to stay composed. "Nova, we need to talk." I said nothing. "I'm just asking for fairness. You've made your point and I get it. But these things, you know how perception works, it's getting out of control." I stared at the wall in front of me. "You lied," I said. "You took what I built and fed it to someone else. Then you tried to bury me for asking questions." "I was under pressure," he snapped. "You think this job is easy? Investors breathing down your neck, everyone wanting a piece?" There it was, the truth, raw and unvarnished. He didn't regret what he did. He regretted getting caught. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," he added. "Just help me contain this before it destroys everything." I almost laughed. "Ethan," I said quietly, "this isn't about you anymore." Then I hung up. That same afternoon, the board issued a statement. Effective immediately, Ethan Rowe has been placed on administrative leave, pending a full investigation. It wasn't termination, but it was enough for now. The next Monday, I received an offer from a company I'd admired for years. A role I hadn't even applied for. Head of brand strategy. The message from the recruiter was simple. "We read your email. We saw what you stood up for. That's the kind of leadership we want." I cried for a long time after that. Not because I got the job, but because I hadn't realized how long I'd gone without feeling valued. Later that week, a staff-wide meeting was held at my old company. An interim CEO had been appointed. Several key employees gave notice. Others stayed, but only under the condition of sweeping changes. In that meeting, someone asked, "What's being done to restore trust?" No one had an answer. Because trust, once shattered, doesn't rebuild itself. It has to be earned. Slowly, painfully, honestly. And Ethan? He'd run out of time. It didn't happen overnight. Ethan didn't get dragged out in handcuffs. There was no dramatic headline with his face plastered across it, at least not at first. No single explosion, just the slow, brutal collapse of a man who thought he was untouchable. And maybe that was more satisfying. In the days following his suspension, whispers turned into statements. Statements turned into resignations, and behind every quiet exit was someone who had once been silenced, now finally speaking out. Mia, the engineer who'd messaged me, published her own story on Medium. He made me feel like I was crazy, like I didn't understand my own code. He rewrote my documentation, blamed me for bugs he introduced, and told me I was too emotional to be a lead. Her post went viral in less than 48 hours. Then came another from a former recruiter. I left after he forced me to withdraw a qualified female candidate because she wouldn't fit the company vibe. I stayed quiet. I wish I hadn't. The stories kept coming. Each one chipped away at the illusion Ethan had built around himself. The visionary, the genius, the charismatic leader with a golden touch. Turns out the golden touch was just well-practiced manipulation. By week 2, industry blogs started digging deeper. They pulled old quotes from press interviews, cross-checked them with internal documents from my email drop. Discrepancies began to surface. Exaggerated revenue projections, inflated user data, promises to investors that didn't match the books. And then, the board acted. An emergency meeting was called. Ethan was officially terminated with cause. The announcement was cold clinical. Mr. Rowe is no longer affiliated with the company. We thank him for his contributions and wish him well in his future endeavors. But what it really meant was, don't call us. We're distancing ourselves. The golden boy had become radioactive. He lost his LinkedIn verification first. Then his profile disappeared entirely. The tech podcast that used to invite him every quarter stopped saying his name. Former allies stopped replying to his emails. His scheduled keynote at a major industry conference, quietly canceled. Rumor had it, he tried to pitch a new startup to a few VCs. None took the meeting. He went from power lunches to echo chambers in weeks. One day, I got a text from someone I barely knew in legal. He's selling his condo, heard he's leaving Seattle. I didn't respond, because I didn't need to. He had built his kingdom on the backs of others, stealing ideas, silencing voices, manipulating trust like currency. And now, he couldn't even buy silence. But this wasn't about watching Ethan fall anymore. This was about what came after. At my new company, things felt different, not perfect, not magically healed, but different. I was seen, I was heard. When I disagreed in meetings, no one called me difficult. When I asked hard questions, people leaned in, not away. I started to sleep better, eat better, breathe easier. One afternoon, during a team lunch, a junior copywriter asked me, "How did you know when it was time to speak up?" I paused. The truth was I didn't. I just knew that staying silent had started to feel like self-betrayal. So I told her, "You don't always know, but your body does. When you're constantly anxious, doubting your own worth, shrinking to make others comfortable, that's not just stress, that's your soul waving a red flag." She nodded. Wrote it down. And in that moment, I realized something. This was the real win. Not just the fall of a corrupt CEO, but the rise of a workplace where people like me didn't have to beg to be respected, where we didn't have to be destroyed to be heard. And Ethan, he'll never understand that kind of victory, because he never built anything real. 3 months later, I received an envelope in the mail. No return address, no note, just my name handwritten in bold black ink. Inside was a letter, 4 words, "You finally won, Nova." And beneath it, a business card. Ethan Rowe, freelance consultant. A Gmail address, a phone number I didn't recognize. The title, stripped bare. No company, no title, no prestige. I stared at the card for a long time. At first, I thought it was a joke. Then I realized it was a surrender. I didn't reply. Instead, I opened my laptop and got back to work. These days, my work felt different, not easier, but freer. Like breathing after holding it for too long. In the weeks that followed, I was invited to speak on a podcast about ethical leadership. Then a Women in Tech panel in New York. Then a private roundtable for startup founders navigating post-scandal restructuring. Each time I told my story, people leaned in. Not just because it was dramatic or viral, but because it was real. It mirrored something too many people had felt but never voiced. That deep, gnawing fear that your value only exists as long as you stay silent. that if you speak up, you lose everything, that your worth is negotiable. But here's the twist most people don't expect. I didn't lose everything. I found something. I found the power in my voice. I found a community of others who refused to stay small. And I found a version of myself I hadn't seen in years, braver, sharper, louder. And that was worth everything I left behind. One afternoon, after a speaking event, a woman in her 40s pulled me aside. Her hands were shaking. "I listened to your story 3 times, she said. "I've been working under a boss like Ethan for 6 years. I thought it was just me. I thought I was weak." She paused. "But now I've decided to leave. I'm starting my own design studio. I just needed to hear that someone like me could do it." I hugged her, because I knew exactly what it felt like to need that kind of proof. To need someone to go first. To need someone to survive the fire and walk out not just alive, but stronger. And that's the thing they never tell you about people like Ethan. They might win for a while. They might even build empires, but the moment someone lights a match of truth, their entire kingdom burns. And from those ashes, something better always rises. So if you're sitting in silence, doubting your voice, wondering if it's worth the risk, let me say this clearly. It is. Even if your voice shakes, even if no one claps, even if they try to erase you, speak anyway. Because somewhere, someone's future is waiting for your courage to echo.